You've watched tens of videos on college motivation for studying, building good habits, internship applications, talking to new people, and more. And yet, none of them have worked, even if you've applied things like Indistractable, Dopamine Nation, and Atomic Habits. That's all because these resources have one issue in common. They don't emphasize that motivation is a myth. Finding motivation through external change is never going to solve your motivation problem. And that's because motivation isn't an external challenge, it's an internal one. Every single motivation challenge that you have is founded in your internal challenges. The problem with the previous motivation advice is that they all ask the question, how do you create motivation? But they don't ask, how do you become the student motivated to do X? Why listen to me? Well, for the past few months, I have been working with the Octalysis Group, which is the #1 gamification consultancy in the world. We've taken all the principles that make video games fun, engaging, enjoyable, as well as card games and board games, and we've applied them to real life stuff to make important things more engaging and engaging things more productive. Over the last 10 years, we worked with companies like Google, Lego, Tesla, over almost 200 at this point. And the Octalysis framework, which is what all of the motivation that engagement design we do is based on, has over 4,000 scholarly references now on Google Scholar. On top of that, I have been creating so much content the last 6 years on meta learning, spirituality, and engagement. So in this video, we're going to take everything I've learned and we're going to create motivation advice that is better than anything you've been told elsewhere. This advice is going to create lasting motivational change for studying, homework, internship applications, talking to new people, building good habits, and more. It's going to help you become a general specialist in the age of AI. It's going to build your critical thinking skills, profoundly change your relationship with accomplishment, and finally, and most importantly, do what this channel is all about, which is motivate you for the spiritual path. So let's start by exploring what it means to see motivation as identity change. And then we'll move into 3 concrete ways that you can become the student motivated by X. So this all starts with the question, what actually is motivation? It's probably a good starting point. Well, it comes from the Latin word movere, which literally just means to move. So motivation is the force which drives us to some future state. This is a profound thing that humans can do. We are fueled by psychological energy. We're able to project ourselves into a future state and then take energy from that projection into the present. That's literally what you're doing when you're motivated to do your classes. You're imagining a future state, even if it's unconsciously, of a good career, financial freedom, whatever, and then you're taking that energy into the present in order to motivate yourself. So the question then becomes, where does this energy come from in that imagination? And there's 3 different paradigms for this question. The first and oldest one is that motivation comes from external, extrinsic change. This is the classic factory worker, carrot on a stick paradigm. You give people some money, they're motivated to do it, or whatever other extrinsic motivator. The better paradigm, which has come out the last few decades, is motivation comes from extrinsic and intrinsic external change. So it's not just carrot on a stick anymore. It's also things like giving people creative autonomy, giving people collaborative or competitive social connection, giving people curiosity and fueling people through surprises, stuff like that. Now, that's a much better paradigm, and it's what a lot of more developed motivational advice talks about. But there's a third paradigm, which is almost nowhere, and is what we're going to talk about in this video. And that is motivation comes primarily from internal identity change. Now, obviously, sometimes extrinsic change is needed. Like, for example, a person with diabetes struggles to motivate themselves for some things because they're not feeling well, right? So getting insulin is a great idea there. Or if you're in a really toxic relationship, that person might be really sapping your energy for things, and actually cutting them off in an external way is how to navigate that motivation. But even in those two cases, the insight is that identity founds your motivation to do those two things. Maybe you don't want to cut off the toxic relationship because you have an identity with yourself that needs love, that craves connection from others, even if it's toxic. And so before you navigate that, you won't be able to cut off that relationship. You become what you do, the actions you take, the habits you have, the routines that you do. It all shapes your identity. So every single external, extrinsic, and intrinsic change that you do is founded in your identity towards that. So this is much more sticky than the other two paradigms because identity can activate action, it can direct action towards the right thing, and it can also persist action, which seems pretty awesome. Now, an analogy that you can use to understand this a little better is imagine that you are a gardener with a garden and you're planting trees, flowers, and vegetables. But as with all gardens, if you've ever done gardening, weeds start to come. And the first paradigm of motivation would say that the way you navigate these weeds is just by changing your garden's location, right? Not the most effective, because now you have to restart the entire gardening again. It's going to take time. The second paradigm is you add fertilizer to the garden, which not only makes your plants grow better, but it also, maybe that fertilizer is anti-weed, right? So the weeds, they aren't as likely to come up again. The third paradigm, which is the new one that I'm advocating for, is just cut the weed, like get rid of the entire root and stem structure and then replant another plant there, right? Which is the longest term solution. Is not only can you keep all the plants that you had before, but you also don't have to relocate. You can still add the fertilizer, but now you are ensuring the weeds permanently don't come back, especially when you plant a new thing there. So what's an example of how important internal change is? Because you've got the garden analogy now, but let me give you two examples to really get it set in stone. So let's say you have an external challenge, which is you get distracted by Duolingo on your phone a lot. Don't worry, I've been there. I'm learning Spanish. I had a lot of fun using Duolingo for that. So that's the external challenge. But what's the internal challenge rooting the addiction, right? The internal challenge could be a number of things, which is maybe you have an internal relationship stopping you from studying because you have FOMO and you don't want to miss out on the league ranks that come out every Sunday in Duolingo. Every week, the new standings for leagues come out and you get placed in a higher category if you did well. Or maybe you're anxious about a group project that you have to do and you procrastinate on the group project because your group members are relying on you and you're scared of disappointing them. Which connects to the next internal relationship, which is maybe you have imposter syndrome and you're scared of doing the group project because it will reveal that, oh my God, I don't belong here. I'm not as smart or whatever as the other students. Notice how if you just tried to, I don't know, put your phone on grayscale or delete Duolingo, that might not solve the issue. The challenge is the internal relationships, the identity. And so you just find something else instead of Duolingo. Another example is maybe you can't motivate yourself to journal consistently. And the external challenge is you're too busy from classes, from friends, and from clubs. Now, the internal challenge rooting this might be you're creating the busyness because you have a lack of life purpose and direction. And you know that if you journaled more, it would reveal that you don't have the direction in college that you're hoping for. and that would cause a lot of suffering, right? So notice again that if you just tried to set some time to journal and didn't solve the internal challenge rooting it, like confront the fact that maybe this is why I'm not journaling, the journaling probably wouldn't work out. And what is the solution to both of these is navigating your identity, which is why for this video, I created a free college freshman cosmic journaling kit, which is a gamified journaling system that helps you build your emotional intelligence, your self-understanding, and your purpose in just 15 minutes a day with 1,000 journaling questions and 5 journaling templates. So if you want to check that out, it's in the description below. Now, moving on with the video, there's other weeds you might have, right? These are just some weeds that was mentioning here. You could have self-doubt. Maybe you're an overthinker. Maybe you're a perfectionist, or you compare yourself to people a lot. People pleasing, restlessness, toxic productivity, and on and on and on. Right? There's so many weeds that we could have. I've been talking about weeds like they're negative, and I want to really emphasize that weeds aren't good or bad. It's all relative, right? Sometimes they could be good. Like, for example, maybe not doing the group project that you were going to do helps you bond with a friend that also is procrastinating. So you got to bond with a friend. Or maybe not journaling because you're so busy, it actually is helping you not confront the suffering of having to navigate your life purpose at that time. So notice how weeds aren't good or bad. They're trying to help you a lot of the time. They're trying to protect you from something. And you should come at them with compassion and love rather than this thing sucks and it's keeping me from becoming who I want to become. Now, there are some times where we still want to navigate these weeds so that we can become more motivated. And we want to cut the weeds in our garden, resoil, or relocate them. So to do that, we need to define our identity and actually shift it. Because I've told you some of the internal relationships you might have in those examples. But then the question is, well, what actually is our identity, right? So that we can figure out what in our holistic college life is forming our relationship to our external challenges. Now, this is where we get really profound. You have to stay with me for a bit because this is where we get a little into spirituality. Identity is made from the forms that you attach to in consciousness. Identity is the forms that you attach to in consciousness. And I mean this literally. You attach to your body, your mind, your emotions and thoughts, usually attached to the things that you feel better about. Then you other all of the things that feel, often the things that you don't like maybe opposite political party, or you other your friendships because you say, well, they're not me, right? These are other people. You other your college from you because it's an idea, not an actual like physical thing, quote unquote. The campus is, but like the idea of your college. Now, what I'm trying to point you to, and then I'll bring this back to motivation, is that you are not this identity or these forms. You are actually the witness behind these forms. In our gardening analogy, you are the gardener doing the gardening. So you can become directly aware of this just by listening to the words as I'm saying this. At all times in your entire college life, there has been something doing the witnessing, something witnessing the emotions that come up, the thoughts that come up, your external challenges. This witness is not any of those things because even the act of witnessing this witness is the witness witnessing you trying to witness the witness. Say that 20 times fast. What I'm trying to point you towards is that the motivation challenges you have arise because your identity is wrapped up in forms that aren't helping you become the person you aspire to be. It is attachment to these forms that keep you stuck in motivational hell because you don't have the clarity to ask where that attachment is coming from, how it's affecting you, why it's affecting you. And these attachments, sometimes called shadows, can be an allergy or an addiction. An addiction is where you're so tied with a form that you can't appreciate how much it's affecting you. So you might be addicted to procrastination. You might be addicted to perfectionism, right? Or an allergy, which is where you're so avoidant of a form that you can't see how it's you can't appreciate how it's affecting you. So in the previous examples, you're allergic to studying because you have imposter syndrome, and studying might reveal that you're not prepared compared to other students. Or you're allergic to deep journaling because you're addicted to achievement and don't have a life purpose, and you're scared that journaling will reveal that. Well, the question then becomes, why do we attach to these forms? Like, why do we identify with anything at all, right? And the insight is because you're trying to survive your identity. You're trying to survive yourself. This is deeply practical stuff. If you didn't attach to your body, to your emotions, to your thoughts, if you didn't other between that and the outside world, it could be really difficult to navigate life. Imagine if you couldn't differentiate between yourself and food, and there was no reason for you to say, well, I selfishly want to eat this food so I can continue surviving, right? So on a physical level, we identify with things, but also on a psychological level, we survive ourselves. Because humans, at least in elite college settings, generally, hopefully, we don't have to deal with physical struggles as much. It's more on a psychological domain. You survive your ideas, you survive your relationships, you survive your shadows. Again, the self, the identity you have is neither good or bad. It just is. And to some degree, you do need it. Because if you didn't have any self whatsoever, you would just die, right? There'd be no reason to eat anything. So it's neither good or bad, but the insight I want to tie in with motivation is that profound motivation comes when you stop surviving yourself so strongly, because you're surviving your motivations. You become what you're motivated by. If you continue to study, you continue to develop the mindset, the motivations to achieve. If you continue hanging out with a relationship, you survive that relationship and are motivated more to hang out with that person. If you continue arguing about conservative or liberal ideas with your friends, then you'll survive the motivation to be liberal or to be conservative, right? So you're literally surviving your motivations. Now, the question then becomes, well, you might say, Aiden, why are other books not talking about that? Why is Atomic Habits or Dopamine Nation or Indistractable, or all these other motivation books not talking about identity change? I mean, this seems so powerful. I will say Atomic Habits talks a little bit about it, but not as deep as what I'm saying here. Well, that's a deep rabbit hole that you just asked, because the issue is society as a whole isn't developed enough to talk about identity change. And the reason is that even talking about identity change gets you to become aware to some degree of how you are surviving your own identity, which is extremely painful. Imagine how difficult it would be to realize that an identity you've had your entire life has been rooted in self-deception, and that you've been motivated, let's say, by anger or resentment your entire life because your parents taught you to be motivated by that. And now you're realizing, oh my God, I've been surviving that motivational identity this whole time. So it's extremely difficult. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video, is getting the conversation started gets us to be able to talk more about this. So that's why it's not talked about as much, but that's why we're doing this video. And this leads us to, how do we actually shape our identity for motivation change, right? We've talked about the power of identity, what identity is. How do we shape it? Now, there's 3 different ways: resoiling, reseeding, and relocating. We'll go over them briefly. These are extremely powerful. This is the gold. So resoiling is an internal challenge solved internally. So this is like switching out a motivation resistance for something else. It's like changing the soil a weed is planted in, changing the soil a weed is in away from a plant, right? And the way that you do it is when you experience motivation resistance, right? Let's say you're studying and you feel some procrastination. Take a breath, accept that the motivation resistance is there, right? It's there. You can experience it. And ask, what is it trying to tell you without blending with it? Really become curious. Then ask, will it let you resoil it? Because sometimes it's not the time. Sometimes the motivation resists so strongly rooted in something, probably a shadow, that you can't change it right away. And then compassionately realize, okay, I'll try and change it later. If it does let you resoil it, change it into something else by reframing it. Like perhaps change the procrastination into excitement for a different thing that you want to study or for hanging out with a friend. It could be anything. You could change perfectionism into diligence, change anxiety into excitement, whatever. And then embrace the change. Really feel it enter into your body. That is resoiling. Very powerful technique. Then we have reseeding, which is even deeper. This is an internal challenge solved internally. This is like completely changing an aspect of your identity, right? Changing what plant you're even growing inside of your garden. So let's say you have an internal challenge, which is you have a thought loop where you compare yourself to other students when you're walking around, and this gives you imposter syndrome. Reseeding would be like rooting your identity in comparing yourself to yourself instead of to others. And you could do this with a visualization, like visualizing how different your circumstances are and therefore how impossible it is to compare yourself to someone else. Visualizing being happy for that person succeeding instead of feeling resentful that you're not able to do it. It could be anything, right? The point is that you are changing an aspect of your identity and therefore changing your relationship to an external challenge. And then the last way that you can navigate identity change is relocating, which is literally changing your internal challenge by an external change. And this is where we get to, I'm not bad mouthing external change. It's still super valuable. It's just that you root it in identity change. You understand that's where the external challenge is coming from. So this is like changing the location of your garden based on insights from your identity. So let's say you're not motivated because you're feeling lethargic, not motivated to study or to work on your life purpose or something else. The external challenge that might be causing this is you have a friend that's bringing you down every time you see them. And, some friendships are so deep that you would endure that difficulty because that friend, be compassionate to them. They're struggling with their own things. But perhaps it's to the point where it's so bad that you realize in order to become motivated again, you have to cut this friend off. And that can be very hard. I've had to do that sometimes in my life. So in this case, you can reseed, you can resoil all you want, but the most effective solution might just be to relocate. And cutting that friend off will allow you to become super motivated again to study or to work in your life purpose or business or something else in college. So those are the three ways of identity change: resoiling, reseeding, and relocating. Now, we've talked about how identity shapes motivation. We've uncovered what identity is, and we've talked about changing it. I hope this video has helped you see the power of identity-rooted motivation change. But some other questions that we haven't answered are, what does your identity motivate you to do? And using everything we've learned, How can we shape all aspects of our motivation in college, right? We've talked about shaping various parts. We've talked about shaping our identity using these 3 different strategies. But is there a more concrete frame through which we can use to think about all the ways we could be motivated by something? How can we shape that? And there's actually a very concrete frame in the Octalysis group, which is the Octalysis framework, which literally splits all motivations into 8 core drives. If you don't have any of these motivations, you have no motivation to do anything. And using that frame, we can concretely think about each of those 8 motivations. How do we shape those in order to become more motivated in college? Shape our identity. Now, if you want to figure out how to do that, this video is actually based on a much longer motivation video I made, which is much more profound, much more in-depth. This was probably the first 30 minutes of that video. So check out the longer one up above if you're interested. Skip around 30 minutes or so and you'll, I did include different examples in this one, but you'll get much more from that one. Also, I would love, if you want to implement the stuff here, for you to check out my Cosmic Journaling Kit, which I mentioned earlier in the description below. This is a free gamified journaling system to help you grow your emotional intelligence, your self-understanding, and your purpose with 1,000 journaling questions and 5 templates in just 15 minutes a day. So check that out. It's free in the description below. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Eat some peanut butter, and bye-bye.